Thank you for being with us. The topic tonight is guns and weapons of mass destruction. Beyond control. Some people have mentioned to me, how can I put guns and weapons of mass destruction? Well, it's the same problem. One's on the micro level, one's on the macro level. The only real difference I see right now is that so far you can't rustle up a weapon of mass destruction through Amazon or go to Walmart. But soon that will happen. And so the question, series of questions, how do we deal with it? How we see ourselves? On the micro level of possession of guns and on the macro level, nations increasing the sophistication of their weapons of mass destruction and the growth of other countries receiving it, having it. How do we deal with it? I'm looking here for halacha, Jewish law, but at the same time, we're really looking for wisdom. How do we approach it? So let's start. Section 1, I have here the dilemma, or maybe it's the trauma of human worth. The context that I'm interested in talking comes from, there'll be a number of sections from the Talmud, here the Mishnah 200 CE of Sanhedrin that deals with adjudication of trials. And here we're talking about capital trials. Punishment is capital punishment. And the question is, how were the witnesses inspired with awe? We intimidate the witnesses. We want to make sure they're saying the right thing, that they're not lying or having some fantasy or some conclusion they shouldn't have come to on their own. So the first part of the Mishnah, which I'm not going to read, you have it there, is a very tough notion of the prosecutor saying to the witnesses, we're going to check what you have to say. And if you're not right, you're in trouble. That's the first part. The whole section here is actually almost like a court case drama, except it's a combination of a court case drama with the attempt to couch it really as a drasha, as a exegesis on the particular verse. And here we see in the middle, Cain, who killed his brother. The blood is written, the bloods of thy brother cried out to me. Not blood of thy brothers, but the bloods of thy brother. Damim in Hebrew, or demei, here it's in demei, is plural. We always would say blood is not bloods, but here the rabbis are being very careful because they want to derive all sorts of meaning from this verse. And the first meaning that it says is that his blood and the blood of his potential descendants, that if you're testifying about someone who killed someone else, or you yourself are giving false testimony, and this person's going to go out and get capital punishment, you're not only killing him, but you're killing all the further generations. There's an infinity of generations that's brought out here in terms of this one death. Alternatively, and this is part of the drasha material, the exegesis, the bloods of thy brother teaches that his blood was splashed over trees and stones. This was the first murder. He hit him with a stone, a pointed stone, blood's gushing everywhere. Why is that here? Because it's part of the drama of what a good prosecutor would do. And for this reason, as it turns into a drasha, a sermon, was man created alone, human created alone to teach thee, Adam was created alone, that whoever destroys a single soul of Israel, Scripture considers the guilt to him as though he destroyed a complete world, and whoever preserves a single soul of Israel, Scripture ascribes merit to him as though he's preserved a complete world. And this is, the second generation, first generation, Adam was alone. They remember this. A person's created on their own to show us that a person's an entire world. So you have the infinity of worth. Now, the whole thing of Israel is just a mistake, as it were. It was added 2 words. It's not in the oldest Mishnah that we have. It doesn't fit into the exegesis here. The exegesis here is universal. Why of Israel? Because we're talking about the court situation when someone is accusing, one Jew is accusing, one Israelite's accusing another Israelite. But in actuality, it's a universal concept. So there's an infinity of worth, there's an infinity of generations, there's an infinity of bloodshed when it's not done properly. And they continue with a certain notion, human was created alone for the sake of peace. Then one might not say, my father was greater than your father, and things like that. So we have infinity and all these currents of words and all this flood of words, infinity of generations going backwards. And you go down a few more words, a lot of good stuff here. Therefore, every single person is obliged to say the world was created for my sake. Basically, the prosecutor is saying it's so important for you to do the right thing. The individual value is infinite. But then they ask a good question. Why should we incur this anxiety? In Hebrew, the word sarah, this hard thing, this who needs it? After all, if we give the wrong testimony, then someone is going to die who's really innocent. No, then it isn't already written. You be a witness, you have to come forward. But then it says, last line, well, the truth is, when the wicked perish, there is joy. There's almost a balance, but not a complete balance. There's a tremendous anxiety in the loss of one human life, tremendous anxiety about the generations that may no longer have the possibility of being there. There's a tremendous notion that once bloodshed begins, bloodshed means the blood is splattered everywhere. That's anxiety. Let's run away from it. Let's not deal with it. Let's not bear witness. By the way, this is exactly the problem we find ourselves in with regards to weapons of mass destruction, the gun killing, massive amount of blood, the destruction of families, the almost endless pain in the gun situation, weapons of mass destruction, we can't even hardly even imagine it. And one of the results is that even when we know something is wrong or that things have to be changed, instead of being charged to do it, the anxiety really leads us to a situation that we do nothing. Why do we need this anxiety? Maybe we'll make a mistake. Maybe we'll do a policy that will be wrongful. Maybe if we bear down too hard, who needs to? It will have results that we don't want. But then the counter is when the wicked perish, there is joy. A hard verse, but the verse telling us that, well, you may have to do something. So how do you achieve this balance? How do you achieve the balance of protecting who you need to protect and at the same time making sure that wrongfulness doesn't take place? I'd like to go with you to the second section, which should be actually on page 2, which is a paradigm in halacha, the bad dog paradigm. It actually comes from a non-dog situation. A verse in Deuteronomy and Devarim, Kitiveh Bait Chadash, you build a new house, Vasita Ma'akal Gagecha. You build a new house, you should make a parapet. Make a little fence up there, a roof, slanting roof or a flat roof. Why? That you shall not bring blood upon thy house, if any man fall from that, because you create a situation so it can fall off. So you have to guard a situation. You have to make sure, what's my problem? I built a house. I didn't tell anybody to go up on the roof. Well, people do go up on the roof. I didn't tell anybody to go by the edge of the roof. Well, people do go by the edge of the roof. I didn't tell anybody to slip. Well, people do slip. Therefore, don't bring blood upon the house. This law of the parapet becomes a general principle of not lo tosim damim beveitecha. Don't bring blood upon your house. There are various missionaries. The Tosefta is terrific. Skip down to the Mishnah Bava Kama, and look how it's applied here. Lo yigadel adam et hakelev el im kein lo yakosher b'shel shelet. One should not raise, I say here, the dog, because it actually, the Hebrew says, I try to get it as exact as possible. It says hakelev. One should not raise the dog, and we'll come back to maybe why is it the dog, unless it is bound with a chain. Why? Because you don't want to bring blood upon the house. You got to be careful about the dogs you raise. Just to say it right now, I'm talking about you have guns in the house. What about having certain kind of dog in the house. And I'm not talking about your little poodle Fifi, and I'm not talking about the really cute Chihuahua. We have to figure out what the dog is. And let's look at the Jerusalem Talmud, my translation, and I made a mistake in the translation. Right, this same quotation. You can't raise a dog unless it has a chain, it's bound with a chain. And then it continues. Rabbi Hanina says, Scripture, pasuk says, of anyone who raises. Here I have a bad dog. It's not in the Jerusalem Talmud. It's a dog. One should not raise a dog. Bad doesn't exist there. I'm the bad guy here. I translated wrong. Within his property, because a person has it, he also withholds kindness from a friend. An interesting verse from Eov. He takes away kindness. Who wants to go into the backyard where there's a picture, even on the fence, of a vicious dog, and there's a more vicious dog inside? It would seem to be, it seems to kind of moving in that direction, just as dog, but moving in the direction of viciousness. But the word bad hasn't applied yet, even though I have it in my title, and I have it here. You know what? It's not a neighborly thing to do. And then we go from this. Jerusalem Talmud was edited a couple hundred years, 350, 150 years before the Babylonian Talmud, which kind of came together at 499, 500. No man should breed a dog unless it's on a chain, or raise a dog. That's my translation had it earlier. Our rabbis taught no man should breed a dog or raise a dog unless it's kept on a chain. However, you can breed it in a town adjoining the frontier. Frontiers are always dangerous. Whole levels of study of frontier towns, of what frontier means. In any situation, any place, frontier from one culture to another culture, always, or one nation to another nation, one ethnicity to another ethnicity. In those situations, he should keep that dog chained during the daytime, then loose it only at night. Where I grew up, we used to call this junkyard dogs. Junkyards had all this metal, all this valuable material, and people would come for it, so they would let out the dogs at night. Vicious dogs, and people would not go into the junkyard because they knew. Same thing here. It says you can let out those dogs during the night to protect yourself, obviously within some sort of given location or within some sort of fenced-off area, it would seem. Rabbi Elazar the Great says that he who breeds dogs is like he who breeds swine. The Mishnah says you shouldn't breed swine. And what's the practical bearing? That he be declared cursed. It's a cursed thing to do. So the Rabbi Elazar goes even further. You should not raise dogs at all. Here's this kind of like, well, it's the frontier. Maybe you really need a dog for protection. Rabbi Elazar is against raising this dog. The halacha doesn't go like Rabbi Elazar the Great. Rabbi Elazar goes like the rabbis who say, okay, you can raise it, but you got to make a difference between keeping the dog totally under control during the day, because you'll bring blood upon your house. It's a dangerous thing to have it. And at night, within a given situation, to protect yourself, you can do so. And they quote Rabbi Yosef, who says Babylon was on a par with the town adjoining the frontier. And then they say Narda. You know, it's not just frontier towns. There are dangerous cities. Let's apply the same law. Have it bound during the day. Let it loose for protection of the community at night. I think let loose means while people are inside their homes within a given context. And more things about it. Basically, the last part here says, you know what's dangerous with them? It's not just the biting of such a dog and its wounding, but it's also even its bark. If you turn the page 3 at the end of this, a certain woman went to a neighbor's house to bake, and a dog suddenly barked at her. And the owner of the house said, don't worry, this is an old dog, there's no teeth. She says, was so frightened that the embryo has already moved. She had a miscarriage. This is also a situation. So what's it saying so far if you compare this? And some authorities have thought to compare this situation to owning firearms. How do you can control it? Can you make a distinction between being in a dangerous area like a border town or a dangerous area like Babylon? When do you let the dog? When do you let the dog not to be under full control? In other words, the dog at its ready, lock and load, carrying a loaded gun. Well, maybe at night that's really the situation where you need to do it. But the thing that's added here at the end, that the fear itself is not a negligible aspect. You may say fear is part of the defense of the individual or the community. We're carrying weapons, so you're not going to start up with us. But the fear that produces, not only on people that may do damage to you, but on your own family, your own lotosim. Don't put blood within your house. It's not as simple as one might think. The Torah, and that's skipping down to Jacob ben Asher, the first post-Mishnah Torah, really terrific compendium of Jewish law. He, all of a sudden, now you say the words, v'asr gadel kelev. He makes a distinction. It's forbidden to raise, now you say the word, a bad dog. Bad dog, kelev, violent dog, menacing dog, bad dog. Unless he is bound with metal chains and tied up. He doubles the words. You know, it was not bound, tied up, metal chains. And in a city close to the border is permitted to raise him, but you have to tie him up during the day. Exert some form of control. I will skip down to the Shiltei Giborim from the same time. You have your dates there. I'm shocked. From whence the Jews get the permission to raise dogs? It seems, where do we get this? And it appears that this is specifically in a city next to the border during the day when they're not afraid. That's when we're not afraid. But at night, when you need extra security, one frees the dogs, you let the dog loose. And we who dwell amongst them, I mean Gentiles, means as a minority, we're in a dangerous situation. Even during the day, we set the dog loose. Wow. You got to carry. You got to be packing. Got to have weapons, just as we do at night in the land of Israel in the border city. For just as in the border city, we set the dogs loose at night, so too we set the dogs loose even during the day. This is in Spain and Italy. And on the next page, on page 4, the Yam Shel Shlomo, one of the really greatest commentators and used the commentary as for deciding Jewish law. He says back to the Shiltei Giborim, this is not at all correct. Okay, page 4. You're wrong. This is not correct. Firstly, our eyes see that we do not need more guarding, even though we dwell amongst the Gentiles, thinking that our dogs will save us. Actually, just as we tie up the dog during daytime, so too for us today, can't loose it during daytime. It may create too much damage. A gun can go off, person gets mad, a dog may go off. Dog gets mad. The owner of the dog gets mad. There's an altercation. And so even if you say there's a greater worry in our time for all sorts of reasons, it makes no sense to permit dogs because this is a placing of blood in the house. And the sage has only said to let the dog loose at night when it's a more protected situation. So the permission is only to raise a dog. But he says, the permission is only to raise a dog. It's not bad. But what he's saying here is that even though there may be a fear, in other words, he doesn't say against the prior Shiltei Giborim, the person that we saw a little bit earlier, he says, we're in a dangerous situation. Dogs should be loose even during the day. And the Yam Shel Shlomo says, no, you can't go that far. If we need more guarding, there's a tremendous difficulty in letting dogs loose during the day. And I'm making the comparison, not him. It's not the Yam Shel Shlomo. Let's talk about firearms. Daniel Landes talking about firearms right now. There's tremendous danger not having these guards. It's one thing to have a guard late at night in a dark alley in a dark situation. It's another thing to have people carrying all the time weapons. I'm saying the weapons are the equivalent of that. Yes, It's sometimes dangerous. It's often dangerous. Yes, 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 it's often dangerous. But where's the control? Where's the control factor? What the Yam Shel Shlomo is saying is that even though there may be a greater danger where we are, it's a mortal danger in and of itself to have a propensity, a large number of guns and firearms. Dogs. I'm comparing it to fire. I'm saying firearms are comparable. So what are you going to do? There is no final answer to this question. I brought a Jerusalem Talmud, which gave me a little shock. Person invited a sage to his house, had his dog next to him. You invite for dinner, you invite the Rav, and then you put your dog to sit next to the Rav. Sage says, how did I merit this insult? Right? He says, Bizayon ana chayav lecha? I mean, why are you insulting me? Householder responded, my master, I am repaying you for your goodness. Why? In other words, I'm actually treating you right. Kidnappers came to the town, and one of them tried to take my wife, and this dog ate his testicles. In other words, the argument the other way. You know what? You want to protect? Well, you got to have firepower. You got to have a vicious dog, except that you have to control it. It's not a fully finished argument, but I like to again repeat here is that the general notion of the Talmud of the rabbis is that it's not a question about, generally for most of them, it's not a question of raising a dog. It's raising a bad dog. Who's going to control it? When is it going to do damage? And the Yam Shel Shlomo again tells us, you can't always, sometimes you have, for the betterment of society, of blood in your own house, you don't care, and house here could also refer to society in general. You cannot always be sure that you will be under control. Jerusalem Talmud says to us, but when you need it in a strong way. I don't think it's an equal argument, but I think these are the considerations one must have. There's no talk here about the right to bear arms. And there's no talk here about the complete necessity to bear arms. What's talked about here is how do we deal in a dangerous situation? And one of the notions here is overall, don't make the situation worse. Overall, don't make the situation worse. Be sure you know what you're doing. And the whole notion of guarding, whether guarding means that it has to remain, firearms have to remain under guard, whether guarding means you have to make sure who is able to have firearms, when people can bear firearms. Are people able to bear firearms as they walk into a movie theater? These rabbis, I'm guessing, would say no, right? That's just a place that if someone goes a little or a lot crazy, something terrible is going to happen. Can they bring it into a synagogue, into a church? Obviously not. Can they carry concealed weapons? This whole notion here is not to be concealed. There's much material here. There's only a certain amount you can take out. When you want to ensure safety of society, you have to take it into account. Let me go to section 3 with you. In section 3, I call it a kind of defense or problems of defense. So how do you defend yourself? And what does it mean you defend yourself? Again, I'm not going to find an outright prohibition of anything, but what are the issues involved? And there's famous Mishnah also from Sanhedrin, different page. And it talks about the biblical case if a person burrows into your house, climbs into your house at that point. And basically what it says is, and he does some damage, is he guilty also for the damage? Well, by burrowing into your house, actually, and this seems to be an argument for having guns, there is, he may be blood guilty. In other words, he's doing something. By burrowing into your house, he may be chayav mita. He is liable for the death penalty. Death penalty might be from the household owner at that moment, giving him the death penalty, shooting him, sicking that dog upon him, clapping him with a rolling pin, whatever that is. Why? Because there's a very interesting thing. In the middle, Rabbi says, what is the reason? That's like 5 lines down. What is the reason for the law of breaking in that you're actually allowed to kill the person who broke in? Because it is certain that no man is inactive when his property is concerned. In other words, ein adam ma'amid asmo al mamona. When a person sees someone stealing from him, they immediately respond. A person grabs a person is active. So if someone breaks into your house, it's natural for you to respond. Therefore, this one, the thief, must have had a reasoning. If I go there into this man's house, the owner will oppose me if he discovers me, and he'll prevent me from stealing. But if he's going to do so, I have to be prepared. I will kill him. I'll be prepared to kill him. Therefore, the Torah says, if he comes into your house to slay thee, stop, forestall by slaying him. That's the English, but Hebrew. Imbola harcha hashkem hargo. A major principle of the rabbis. If he comes to kill you, get up early and kill him. The thief doesn't want to kill the owner of the house. The thief wants to get in and get out, safe as possible. But he knows that there's always the possibility that the owner may wake up, the owner may come back home, the owner may hear his footsteps, see that something is being stolen, come up against, and therefore the thief says, well, worst comes to worst. If I can't run away from him, I'll have to, or avoid him, I'll have to kill him. And therefore he becomes a rodef. The thief becomes a pursuer. What I think is important here is not the application of the halacha per se. By the way, there used to be a whole bunch of English prison movies in the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s. That was always a young guy joined some sort of gang, and they came to some place to rob. It could be a mansion, it could be a factory which had a vault. And they come late at night, and all of a sudden the watchman comes by, and one of the members of the gang kills the watchman. Terrible thing. And the young fellow who had joined the gang says, "You said there wouldn't be any violence." He says afterwards as they speed away. And one of the older fellows looks at him and says, "What do you think? What do you think? You know, he would turn us in, he would stop us, he would hurt us. Of course we had to kill him. And you knew this. You knew it." This is a lot of movies. Evidently, this was a very popular Mishnah in English movie making. What do you think, kid? You must have known this. You're not so stupid. But I think here, in terms of wisdom, we have to understand what's going on here. Even though the rabbis say, yes, that's real. That's wise. If they come to kill you, you have to kill them first. We're not complete pacifists. No, there's no notion on my part. But they also uncover the procedure of how violence happens. And here how violence happens is a combination of the first infraction, which is going into the house. And the second part is the understanding, kind of like chess, what the next moves are. And those next moves end up with destruction. Well, he's actually coming to kill me, and that's true if this happens. Now, it's very important to understand, according to halacha, you don't have to. What it says, but therefore the Torah decrees a bad. Hence the Torah decreed, if he comes to slay thee, forestall by slaying him. The rabbi, that's not a verse. That's how the rabbis sum it up. It doesn't say, hence the Torah decreed, which means that's what you're supposed to do. It becomes a mitzvah. It's not like that. It just says the Torah says, it becomes a slay thee, forestall him by slaying him. It doesn't mean you can't hide. It doesn't mean you can't let him take the issue, the property. You as the householder. It doesn't mean that you as the person who's stealing cannot at some point give it up and run out, because once they run out of the house, there's no there's no permission for the owner to kill you. There's a dynamic that goes on that cries out for intervention. And this, I think, is part of the wisdom. We have in the whole situation right now, in terms of certainly here, there's weapons of mass destruction, very well timed, computerized responses, which even though there are supposedly human control, these responses, because in the chess-like thinking of the computers, it's not 2 steps or 3 steps ahead, it's 20 steps ahead, that the inevitable result is not to stand down, but the inevitable result is to actually respond with lethal force. I think we have to take this mission, therefore, in this situation. One more notion about who are you allowed to hurt or to even kill. Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin, that's on also Sanhedrin 73a, that's the last paragraph on page 4. The following must be saved from sinning, even at the cost of their lives. If you pursue after your neighbor to slay him, after a male to rape him, after betroth the maiden, that's also a form of rape, to dishonor her, sorry for the old English. But he who pursues after an animal to abuse it, or would desecrate the Sabbath, which are all capital offenses, or commit adultery, must not be saved from sinning at the cost of his life. In other words, you have to only use deathly force in a situation in which a capital, it's not just a capital offense, but a harm of a deadly sort is about to be perpetrated. Rape is considered to be the equivalent of murder, actually even worse in some ways. Well, Talmud says, okay, murder is learned from rape, maybe murder is worse, but in all these cases in which great harm is going to be inflicted, that's the only situation that you're allowed to use deadly force, right? If that's the case, therefore the notion of get off my land or you can't cross this border, it's a big question according to this, whether or not deadly force. You'd have to make the argument that what people are doing at that moment is an army that's storming the border in order to inflict deathly force. If not, there seems here to be no permission at all to inflict deadly force. And that's talking about an individual, that's talking about an army. Therefore, there's a control that the rabbis are seeking to inflict. Rabbis hate idolatry. The rabbis couldn't stand bestiality. But those are not situations because humans are not threatened. Only when humans are threatened with bodily ultimate harm can you respond with these kind of weapons. It's another way. Yes to defense, but defense has to be defined. Defense is defined the way we just said it, and this kind of bodily harm. The rabbis speak at length about this, and I'm not going to say too much about this further, except that on page 5, they bring several verses. And one verse for sure I'd like to look at. So look to like 10 lines from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 lines from the bottom. Whence we know that if a man sees his neighbor drowning, mauled by beasts, or attacked by robbers, he's bound to save him. From the verse, you should not stand by the blood of thy neighbor. You're getting blood. Blood's being shed. You have to save him. Is it derived from this verse? Is it not rather from elsewhere? That one must save his neighbor from the loss of himself. I'll explain this in a moment here from the verse. And you should restore him to himself. There's a verse in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, which says that if you see a lamb, if you see a ram, you see a cattle being lost on its way, and you find it, and you can find its owner, and you can discover the owner, you should return, hashavata veda, returning the lost item. You should return it, the hashevoto lo, you should return this lost object that you saw, this animal, to its owner. The rabbis do something very clever here. they say they take it very, very literally. Again, halachic, all drash is super pshat, is hyper pshat. I've said this in every shiur. So too for halachic or legal drash. The hashevot lo could also be translated, and you return him to himself. So if you see a person who's he's being mauled by beasts, attacked by robbers, you have to save him and return him to himself. I mean, save him, return him to himself. That's a very literal definition in that situation, applying it in that situation. From that verse, I might think it's only a personal obligation to you yourself. You find the situation. But how do you know that, but you might not think you have to take the trouble of hiring men, of hiring other people to help you. If he cannot deliver them in something, you can't save yourself, but you can pay 3 guys to help you. Someone's drowning, and you say to some guys on the beach who couldn't care less, here's 50 shekels, $50, 50 whatever euros. Help me save it. Somebody's getting beaten up here. From where we know that you have to also expend that money. Therefore, this verse, which is Lo ta'amod dam re'echa, do not stand by the blood of or in the blood, really. Lo ta'amod b'dam re'echa, al dam re'echa, don't stand on your neighbor's blood. It says to you, you have to even expand, because it's a very powerful verse. It's a negative verse, don't stand, but which commands a positive action, which almost is like an infinite action. Why do I bring this up in this case here? Because while the rabbis certainly allow, we've seen it, but with caution, with great caution, the use of lethal force to save someone, there's no other way. And by the way, in other parts of the Talmud, if you could save someone by bodily harm, by shooting their leg, by pushing them hard and cracking bones, but instead you shoot to kill, according to the rabbis, that's murder. In other words, you can't use more. That's the definition of something which people refer to as proportionality. Absolutely, proportionality is within Jewish law in the sense that you can't do more harm than is necessary to find a situation. Why am I connecting it here? The emphasis is on saving. The emphasis is on saving. They have different verses tell you different things of how much you have to do. That's the emphasis. The emphasis is on saving a life, not an emphasis of ending someone else's life. And that's the direction of the Talmud. So I have the following to look at with you. One of the biggest problems that we have, what we're facing, weapons of mass destruction, Section 5, page 6. When you besiege a city, this whole area is called Bal Tashchit, unnecessary or wanton destruction. When you besiege a city a long time, making war, you can't destroy the trees thereof. Lo Tashchit, it's Eitzal U'dochel of Garzen, Kimimenu Tochal. It usually refers to fruit trees. And then at the end of the verse, why can't you destroy the trees? I mean, you're going to be in a siege situation which involves war. People are going to die, and you're worried about the trees, or even if it's just the fruit trees. It says that in the very enigmatic paraphrase at the end, phrase in the end, Ki adam esa sadeh lavo mipadecha b'matzor. The question is if this is with a question mark at the end, a period, an exclamation mark. In this translation, it's with a question mark, rhetorical question. For is the tree of the field man, that it should be besieged of thee? In other words, why are you going to war against the trees? Yes, we care about the flowers, we care about the trees, we care about physical destruction, and that's one of the greatest difficulties also. It's not only mass murder, but it's also that destruction. Ibn Ezra says, for the trees of the field are human-like. My translation, I didn't have the Hebrew here, because he's injuring human beings by injuring the means of human life. You shall not destroy fruit trees, which are a source of life for humans. In other words, you have to think what's going to happen after the war. You're going to think of what's going to happen about after the intervention. And if you destroy the fruit trees, and I think this is clearly a paradigm, if you destroy the fruit trees, if you the means of renewal of life, then this is a final terrible calamity in destruction. The rabbis in the Talmud say in Shabbat, he who tears in his anger, you're not allowed to do a destructive act in the Sabbath laws, a destructive act in order to actually do a positive act. You're not allowed to tear something in order to take the fragments of what you tore and to build something from it. That's forbidden. But if you tear in anger or in mourning or all affect damage, you're exempt, because it's actually purely destructive. That's for the Sabbath laws. Exempt for violating the Sabbath, because the Sabbath laws are always based on doing something positive. Sometimes a negative act can be a positive. Here's a strictly positive, strictly negative act. But look what the Gemara takes it. The Talmud takes it. He who rends his garment in his anger, or breaks vessels in his anger, and who scatters his money in his anger, regard him as an idolater. And such are the wiles of the tempter. Today he says to him, the Yetzer Hara, the bad inclination, Satan, the tempter, do this, something which is wrong. Tomorrow he tells him, do that, something which is worse, until he bids him go and serve idols. One sin leading to another sin. But there's something really being pointed out here, is that doing something, once one starts acts of destruction, then there's no end. There's no end to anger. There's no end to nihilism. This goes back to the notion of weapons of mass destruction, gun violence. Once you shoot off, once one person, it wouldn't be enough when we read about some madman goes into a room. It would be enough that he is usually meant. He shot, he shot somebody. Did he have to shoot a second and a third? But that's the way it is. That's the way of the tempter. That's the way of destruction. That's the need for guarding. That's the need for limiting the notion of weapons, because there is no end to it. An idolater is understood by the rabbis here not just this terrible sin of worshiping that which is evil, but idolatry means in this context no control, total nihilism. And in nihilism, it's a black hole that's never enough. It's never sufficient. No one who enters that hole becomes satisfied. I bring it here because anger is part of this whole description, and therefore one cuts down the trees, and that's not enough. One sows salt, or an equivalent today of chemicals, into the very earth so no one can till it again. It goes and goes, and therefore human beings can't regenerate themselves. The Mishnah in Shabbat, and we're going back to Sabbath laws, but it's interesting how they do it. A man must not go out with a sword, a bow, a round shield, or a spear. It's in Shabbat because it's a form of carrying. Because if he does go out, he incurs a sin offering because he's not really clothed. And therefore, they're forbidden. If he does it by mistake, you bring these sacrifices. He didn't remember. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, these are ornaments of grandeur. No, of course you can wear these things because they're really tachshitim. We're proud that person has that sword, has that shield, carrying that gun. But the sages maintain, no, you got it wrong. These are not grandiose. They're merely shameful because you're supposed to beat your swords into plowshares. It's a shame to go that way. The whole mythology of individuals having guns, the whole mythology of people proudly displaying it, of endless gun shows, of endless displays, is shameful. You're not supposed to have wild dogs, but bad dogs, but sometimes you need a bad dog, but you have to carefully guard it. You don't march in a great parade with your bad dogs. You have to, what's it's talking about here is creating an environment which understands that even if you have to carry it, it's a mark of shame. And you only carry it when it's necessary. Come now to, I think, my last piece. There's more to say. Let me summarize the story. This is a story from Judges 11. Yiftach, the Gileadite, Yiftach. Yiftach was a guy from a bad, family, had family problems in terms of how he was born. He was son of a harlot. He was kind of shunned by the rest of the people, the rest of his half brothers. He fled from his brethren. He put together a gang of vain fellows, empty fellows. And then Israelites were under tremendous pressure to save their own lives. Enemies had come to him. Yiftach went with the elders of Gilead and basically says, look, you want me to be in control? You want me to save? They asked him to save the situation because he's a tough guy and he had a gang. He said, I'll do it, but under certain conditions. And now he's going to be before the battle. Verse 30, he vowed a vow to the Lord, if thou wilt indeed deliver the children of Amnon into my hands, the enemies of the children of Israel. Then it shall be that whoever comes forth out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's. I'm going to offer a sacrifice for the first thing that comes out of my house. I don't care how valuable it is. I'm ready to do so. You can see that there's a certain crassness to him, but that's the kind of person often that have to save a situation. 33, he smote them. And 34, he comes back to his house, to Mitzvah, to his house. Who's the first one to come out? His daughter, with timbrels and with dances. Not only that, rabbis, the Bible knows how to tell the story. Worse than that, only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. 35, he rents his clothes and says, alas, my daughter, you brought me very low. I've opened my mouth to the Lord and I cannot retract it. She said to my father, you've opened your mouth to the Lord. Do unto me according to that which you're going to do, but give me a few months to cry and to weep. First of all, I just want to say in terms of the story, when she says, give me time to cry and to weep and to bewail, I think about whenever there's great gun violence, those who are the greatest gun supporters say, our prayers are with you. We weep for you. Doesn't do a damn thing. Doesn't help at all. Now, let's see what the rabbis do with this story, because again, they understand, I think, in good measure, what's really going underneath the story. And they have a little bit of a description which might be fantastical, but they understand the nature of society, and that's what they're really talking about. So if you go to page 8, was not Phineas here is Pinchas. Pinchas was the man, remember, who himself was a righteous avenger. And when he saw the children of Israel, he must have been very old at this time, even according to the rabbis, he avenged those who were fornicating. He did vengeance upon them. He speared them with the Amorite women. And so say, but Pinchas was there in a generation. In other words, why didn't he just kind of like solve this situation? Pinchas would know that this is kind of a vain oath. Nonetheless, Yitzhak says, I cannot retract. So let him take care of it. But Pinchas says, I'm the high priest, son of the high priest. Shall I lower myself and seek out an ignoramus like him and such a vain man? Okay, a good general. So he says something stupid, he'll have to live with it. And Yitzhak says, I'm the head of the tribes of Israel. Shall I lower myself and seek out a commoner? Between the two of them, listen to the rabbis in this midrash. Between the two of them, the wretched maiden was lost. The two were guilty of her death. Because of the inability to try to negotiate, to find a situation, to find a loophole, she's dead. daughter, according to the Midrash, says, my father, is it written in the Torah that one should offer up children on the altar? And she brings quote, of course, it's totally goes against the Torah. It seems even simplistic that the Midrash says it. When any of you present an offering to the Lord, you shall choose your offering from the herd or from the flock, from the herd and not from humans. And a couple other examples like that. Finally, the daughter, according to the Midrashic fanciful interpretation, it's not so fanciful, they understand what's going on, says that all these things she said to her father, he didn't listen to her. She said to him, permit me to go to court. Maybe one of the judges will find a loophole out of your words. She went, they couldn't find the loophole. People are stuck in their formal situation. People are stuck in a kind of case of automatic responses. People are caught that they can't deal with it. Basically, what the rabbis are arguing for here, when she says, this has never happened, is an approach to decision-making, which is not just the formalistic, is it right or is it wrong, but consequentialist. What's going to end up? What's going to be there at the end? What's finally going to happen? And this is supposed to shock us and supposed to motivate us. I quote for myself here, an article from a long time ago, from a book I did a long time ago. The biblical account taken with rabbinic explication provides us the tale of foreboding of the consequences of ruthless war. I think this works for guns as well. Such a war is fought in order to win, and winning means the readiness to sacrifice the very thing one is fighting for, the loss of one's children. That's what war is about. The story warns us of the utter folly that lies in articulated, planned for, and played at mutually assured destruction. Such a system, once put into motion, seems impossible to stop. The story of Yiftach's daughter is a cry to break out of a straitjacketed rigidity of these structures of destruction. It urges us to revoke such vows, to assume the risk of losing by restraint in the very process of struggle, and never to place this mechanism in motion. There's a juggernaut of destruction that we can't seem to move ourselves away from. We know what happens when there's this much guns in society. We know what eventually will happen when nations are at friction with each other and they possess the ability to destroy each other many times over, but we can't move ourselves out of it. Midrash tells us, he, Yiftach, rose and slaughtered her before the Holy One, blessed be he. The Holy Spirit cried out, they have put their children to fire, which I have never commanded, never decreed, Scott says, which never came to my mind. We have to look at the consequences. There's a form of wisdom here. There's an infinity to the value of life, which we know commonplace, but the very first text that we studied talk about the infinity of possibility of harm, and there's infinity of the intrinsic worth of the individual. We know with the bad dogs, don't place blood upon your house. What are you doing? It's self-destructive. There's a need to stop the juggernaut, the inevitability of destruction. We have to find alternatives. Because once destruction starts happening, whether someone breaking into your house or whether or not whether it's just the juggernaut of anger, or whether it's the juggernaut of being unable to encounter the other, destruction itself, we looked at it as nihilistic, and it doesn't stop. It never stops. It's that wildfire that burns until everything is burned up. Don't keep a vow of death. It will destroy us all. That's the share. Our hope is change. Thank you.